Nice.
All right, all good. So yeah, let's hand to Steve now. I really appreciate your time and taking your Saturday morning to come talk to us. So thank you, and I will stop sharing and hand over to you.
Sure, let me just set this up so it shares the right screen. And share content. So today I'm going to go through and we're going to talk about Windows Hello for Business. So just before I start drilling into this, I want to understand everybody's level of experience with Windows Hello for Business and how it works. So can I get a show of hands of how many people are actually using Windows Hello for Business in their environment today? So I got a handful. We got about 4 or 5. So I'm curious to know from the people, and obviously come off mute and let me know, or just drop a message in the chat, but have you thought about Windows Hello for Business, and why, if you have, what's the stopper? What's causing you to not be able to do it?
For us, it's that they only want biometrics, they being management. They don't want to allow a PIN.
Aha, yep. Okay, I've heard that one before, and we can go through that in the session.
One of the challenges one of my customers has for implementing it is that not all of their employees can do cell phone validation or telephone validation because they don't have any means to do that where their offices are.
Yep, I've heard that one as well, and there are scenarios coming forward for that. Any other concerns?
Right now we're required to use PIV cards. Smart cards.
Oh wow, smart cards. That's fun.
Federal government.
We talk about smart cards in here, but they don't necessarily manage down that path. All right, so it sounds to me there's a lot of concerns around how Windows Hello for Business that's stopping it from being implemented, but also I'm guessing with the few people that have come through, there's still a lot of people that don't know what it is and why it's so nice to have in your environment. I'd actually say important to have it in your environment. And the reason why, so before we step into what it is, I'm Steve. I'm a Senior Program Manager at Microsoft, MMD Cat. So if you haven't heard of MMD, I'm not surprised. It's a new product that we're working through, and you'll find it if you go to aka.ms/MMD. It's a bit of fun. There's a plug for me, all my products. I'm also on Twitter's at On-Prem Cloud Guy, and you can also find our podcast series about Intune.training at aka.ms/i.t. And that's where I talk with Ben and Adam on a weekly basis about all of the technology that is coming out for Intune. So that's the shameless plug going through. Windows Hello for Business. Let me just step through if my clicker will work. So the direction that we're looking at for Windows in general is to go to a passwordless strategy. How many people here are managing hundreds of passwords a day? I know I am. I've got password managers through the wazoo. I've got all of my different systems where I use, I won't say the same password, but a consistent password across all of the accounts and all of my devices, because I'm building 20 devices a week sort of thing. And you've got to have that ability to be able to replicate stuff really quickly. So the passwordless strategy is this whole stepped or graduated scenario where we're stepping through from, right, can we do Hello for Business, to does the user need to know their password? And then we're stepping across into, well, we're never typing the password or rarely typing the password. And the last one, which is actually starting to be seen in the wild, is people removing passwords from directories, which is crazy, right? If you said 10 years ago, we're going to remove passwords from user accounts, how many people would have just went, you're smoking crack? But it is attainable today because of moving to newer authentication processes. Things like FIDO2 and Hello for Business, where we're using pins on the device to make it so we've got a consistent experience. Like for me at Microsoft, I type my password maybe once a fortnight, once a month. It's not very often, and it's into older systems. Beyond that, we're fully passwordless. It is fantastic. I don't need to remember it. And that's the most important part, is you don't need to have the users remembering their password if you make the ability to change their password easy. It comes back to the whole, well, how do I have multi-factor? We got the phone, we got a hard token. So now AAD supports that hard token. You can use third-party vendors to do your MFA to validate that you are who you are when you pass that token through. So that's how you can reduce the requirement for the password, because rather than prompting for a password, we're just going to say, all right, go and MFA on your mobile phone, because it's just easier. And in those environments where it's more secure, here's the hard token and go and authenticate with that. Go and authenticate with your service or identity provider that is required. So this is the ping, this is the Okta and associated technologies. The reason why we want to reduce password being used. All right, I'm going to do a quick question out to the crowd. Why do we want to reduce the amount of times passwords are written?
Security.
But why? We use the word security as a verb here. We're saying, well, it's security, but why is it more secure to not type the password often?
Keyloggers, people writing their password on a Post-it note.
Yep. They are the most important reasons. Passwords written on a Post-it note under the keyboard because, well, I can't remember them all. It's like, well, you can. And keyloggers. So especially when you're sitting in a remote site, if you're needing to quickly go into your emails on a shared kiosk computer, if you have a prompt just pops up and goes, select the number that was appeared on the screen on your mobile phone, how much more secure is that than actually typing in the password that you're using? Even if you need both, so you can have it so you have the password and the PIN or the number on the phone, it will handle that off. So these are the reasons why we're going to that passwordless strategy. Part of this conversation is why we now need to start looking at that on our devices. So I'm going to quickly step through this deck, but I've got demos, so it's not just slides, not death by PowerPoint. So at a very, very, very high level, how Windows Hello for Business works on Windows 10 is the user does the gesture, be it face, fingerprint, to sign into the device, and or they can type in their PIN. To go to the conversation we had right at the top of the session of why do we need a PIN as well as a face or fingerprint, is it's an additional component of security. If we just have the camera or the fingerprint, it doesn't allow for that authentication to go through correctly. So it's an extra layer of security on top of it. So when we step through that, there is no ability just to say you must use biometric only. Simple as that, right? It's just not going to be possible today. I'm not saying in the future it's not possible, but it's not possible today. So once we go and do our gesture to sign in to get access to the TPM holding the private key, and that's super important, you either need to have a physical TPM on the device or a software TPM. It is recommended that you use a TPM 2.0 as it's a new technology. I'll get to that in a minute, Harjit, which is the announce. So the Windows sends the hello request up to Azure Active Directory. The announce is, I'm just
Somebody's pouring a drink.
Yeah, that would be Ben.
I got him.
I got him. So when we send the hello up to Azure Active Directory, it then returns a little bit of our key to say, hey, you're allowed to access the TPM to get the identity process. So that is the announce, or I can never get this spelled pronounced right, but we'll go with announce. And then from there, it sends the private key back up to Azure Active Directory with the ID, and it returns the token to be able to be used to sign in. It also includes a refresh token as required. So I'll step through that process and it'll give you access to the TPM, and we're all then accessing everything in Azure Active Directory. Be it AAD, be it Office 365, Azure, or associated. So we've authenticated to Azure Active Directory. But the big problem point is, how do I authenticate to my on-premises? Because by default, they're looking, so my file server is looking to the domain controller, it's not looking to the Azure Active Directory for authentication. So this is part of what we're going to talk about with hybrid key trust and Windows Hello for Business. So let's go through, and because I changed Windows, we're going to talk about security. All right, we had the physical smart card question. Is it safer to have the smart card? Well, actually, no, because what's stopping somebody from getting that smart card and just plugging in and knowing the password through a keylogger? Whereas it's a lot harder to pretend to be somebody's face or fingerprint. Yes, there's the PIN, but the PIN is only tied to that device. So this is where the PIN is far more secure than using the password. So even if you're typing the PIN every time you go and access something on the network, it's more secure than using the password, because the PIN is hosted on the device. It is tied to that device. So if you're not using the same PIN on every computer, which some people do, it stops people from having a keylogger capturing that PIN or that password, that secure token for your authentication to be passed through. So it's more secure in that front. And then the last question is, because whenever we talk about Windows Hello for Business, we're going to be talking about certificates. Can I get a show of hand of how many people hate certificates?
Everyone should raise their hands twice.
Yep. Pretty much the whole call is sitting there and saying they hate certificates. Look, that's fair. Certificates is one of these things that it takes a lot of time to understand what's going on under the hood, but it's super important to understand how they work, right? Certificates will make your life easier if you sit there and realize the process that they're going through. But they are very regimented. You can't have very many deviations from the standards, because as soon as you go a deviation of 5 minutes on your client computer from what your server is, you can't authenticate. Simple as that. You cannot authenticate because the token is no longer trusted. So certificates play an integral part of what we're doing with Windows Hello for Business. Certificates are used on how you get access to the store. And that's the TPM store, not the Microsoft store, not the Apple store, not any of those stores. It's the TPM store where the token for your user object is stored. We're going to step into that and we're going to work through it. But right now we're coming back to that whole PIN. And I know this is going to wind Ben up. The last line there, PINs can be complex. Yes, PINs can be set up to be alphanumeric, but a PIN is a personal identifiable number. But this is where we, in this brave new world, where we have the ability to use a password if we want. We can put password rules associated to it, so we can make them alphanumeric. We can make them need to be a certain length. We can age them out over time. But they're still more secure than using a password on the device, because it should be different to what your user password policy is. And this is where you make them different and make them so they can't have them consistent. Simple as that. And it sounds annoying to the end user, but at the end of the day, we really don't want them to remember their password. Their password's not really important, because when you put in things like self-service password reset and password write back, if they forget their password, just go and reset it. What does it matter? Same with if they forget their PIN, go and reset it. You can do this before you sign into the computer on both scenarios. So it works fantastically. And it makes it easier and more approachable for the end user. So it's something that I'd highly recommend taking some time to investigate. So certificates everywhere. As we all have agreed, we love certificates. Authentication certificates, this is where you've got smart cards, things like that. This is where it's signed or trusted by a certificate authority. Smart cards typically will hold a certificate, a full certificate on the smart card to say, I'm going to trust this device, and I'll go and sign in. These are great. They actually work really well, but in certain scenarios, it doesn't work or is not practical for the organization. We then step across into DC and Kerberos certificates. So DC and Kerberos certificates is how we authenticate between our file server and our client computer and our domain controllers. This is the newer generation, and by newer, I don't mean in the last 3 to 4 years. This is, Kerberos came in with 2000, but it's newer than NTLM and associated technologies that still some applications are using. But Kerberos isn't something new. It's something that we need to be pushing our application writers to leverage, or ideally, if we're going to be getting applications written, we should be using AAD auth, because it'll make life a lot easier for everybody. We then talk about our certificate revocation list being critical, and I cannot stress this enough. Certificate revocation list. So if I was to say CRL or certificate revocation list, does everybody know what I mean when I say that and why it's so integral to the security and trust of the whole system? I know Ben does, because I've spent many, many hours explaining it to him. Feel free to come off mute if you're wanting to have a little explanation. I like people engaging in these sessions.
I think this is a good one, Steve. And my old information, I recall issues where servers weren't able to update their certificate revocation list. I don't know if those technologies have changed, but I'd love to hear if those are still problems people have.
Yep, definitely. So certificate revocation list is quite literally, it is the list of certificates that have been revoked by this certificate authority. They can be hosted either on your CA or on any server. In traditional environments, it has been put into a file server or published out via Active Directory using LDAP. So when we move to AAD joined devices, can we go and get that information? And the answer is no. We don't have permissions to LDAP because it doesn't know how to route through to the LDAP object. We don't have the ability to go to the file server because to get to the file server, we need to authenticate. So it becomes this catch-22. So the scenario that you need to include with your certificate revocation list, and this is super important, is it needs to be on a HTTP address, not a secure address. So it can't be HTTPS because we don't trust the certificate to be able to get to that HTTPS address. So it needs to be a full non-secure website that has that link. Traditionally, we would host that on our certificate authority and it gets published from your certificate authority in there. The other thing that I'm going to say and strongly recommend that you do is when you're creating your CRL list, go and create an Azure application proxy front end for it and present it out publicly. The reason why we do this is if there's routing issues internally, or you need to do Hello for Business authentication from VPN or from external to websites, you don't need to have line of sight to your PKI server or your certificate revocation list location. So it's going to make your life easier in the long run. So certificate revocation list, so important. And you need to get this set up early in your certificate authority environment, because as soon as you go in and change it, you need to go and reissue your root and subordinate certificates on all of your devices. A lot of fun, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then for Hello for Business, we're talking that it is a modern two-factor with asymmetrical keys, which means that it's sitting there and it's got its own set of keys, and it's not actually giving you, it's not passing over the wire an auth token. So if we remember back 15 years ago, it was quite acceptable to send, well, it was almost acceptable still to send clear text username and password over the wire unencrypted. I still remember those days, they were great, but it's no longer something that is supported or recommended because it's so easy to capture that information. So this is where that asymmetrical key of I've got a device with a key, I've got a server with a key, and they don't actually marry up with each other, but they know how to trust each other. So we then step across from certificates and we're going to talk about the infrastructure. Right. So I've left it in there and we'll talk about it with ADFS, but it's not something that we're going to talk about today extensively. But it's important to understand why we're going to talk about it. But do we need Azure Active Directory to do Windows Hello for Business? The simple answer is no, you don't. You can actually do it with group policy. That's where we're going to, that would be a key trust scenario. But the conversation I'd have to you is, why would you bother? Most people are moving their mailboxes to Office 365 and everything associated. So why would we not tie it all into Azure Active Directory and spend the effort setting up Hello for Business as hybrid key trust? And that's where it's going to write a token from the Azure Active Directory down to the Active Directory. And I'll go through that in a quick demo in my lab. The next one is the 2016 domain controller. Technically, yes, you need to have a 2016 domain controller. The minimum spec for hybrid key trust is the 2016 schema, and there are workarounds to not have the 2016 domain controller. But to do the authentication correctly, you need to have at least one 2016 domain controller in your environment. What that means is, if you've got a distributed environment where you've got 1,000 domain controllers across your environment, technically you could get away with one domain controller that's 2016 in the environment to turn on Hello for Business. On the downside, if you then have all of your devices sitting in those remote hubs trying to authenticate using Hello for Business, it's going to come back to your 2016 domain controller to do the authentication. We all know that's not going to be a great experience, but it's technically possible because it's going, all the devices are going to try and find that 2016 domain controller and it's going to melt down. One of the things I'd also state is make sure you move the schema master role to your 2016 controller, as well as any other FSMO roles as much as possible. Because when you move them across, it will update the schema and it will update it will create the key admins group. And we'll talk about that in a little bit in the demo. So ADFS. We know most people are using ADFS in the environment. It's fair enough. It was something that we highly recommended for SAML 2 and things associated around that authentication protocol. If you're doing certificate trust authentication with Hello for Business, yes, you need to have ADFS. But what I'm going to state quite bluntly is don't do certificate key trust unless you have a very, very, very explicit requirement to do it. It sounds easier, but in the long term, it is going to be more painful for you because certificate trust requires a explicit type of certificate on every device in your environment for your user object. which means you've got to make sure your certificates are perfectly dialed in onto the client devices and issuing. If your NDES for some reason has a hiccup for 5 minutes, 5 hours, 5 days, you don't have users signing into the device, or you don't have users being able to do seamless sign-in into file servers and associated technologies. Why would you do certificate key trust? Well, that's where if you've got old domain controllers and things like that. We'll go into that a little bit more in a sec. But don't do certificate trust. Please don't. It's going to cause you more pain than it's worth. And then the last question is around third-party MFA, so Ping, Okta, and all of those technologies. Yes, we fully support them. They work so long as they are supporting the supports MFA flag from Azure Active Directory. That's the important part, is it needs to come from Azure Active Directory to do that MFA trust. There is, I believe, with the certificate trust, you can do it through your ADFS, but I've not gone down that path because ADFS is legacy in my books. My opinion, not the business. We then talk about the infrastructure perspective. So we go all the way from the left to the right. We've got the cloud only, the utopic world. Everything's gone cloud. It's AAD for everything. Yay, we don't have to worry about the on-prem file servers and associated technologies. How many people on the call are sitting in the cloud-only umbrella today? No, you're not, Ben.
Yes, I am.
You still have file servers on-prem. I know that.
I don't know what file server you're talking about. I can't access it because their KDC doesn't work.
I know. Me personally, I'm not fully in the cloud. My labs are, but not anything beyond that. So the real place where most organizations would be playing is that hybrid space. This is where we've gone and made the transition to using Intune. We're using co-management. We're using AAD for some sort of authentication or associated processes. This is where we started out using DirSync. How many people remember using DirSync? It's not a scary place, but we're now using Azure Active Directory Connect, and that is the important part for Hello for Business. You need to use AAD Connect. You then have the ability to use federated domains, or you have to have a federated domain to do it easily. There are ways around it. You've got your on-prem domain, but then you're also going to have applications hosted in Azure Active Directory. And this isn't just Microsoft products as well. I want to stress that. This technology can be leveraged to go across to use things like Workday or SAP or any of those technologies that have been published as an AAD application in AAD. So it gives you that flexibility. And then the last one is that on-prem scenario where you're not allowed to go to the cloud for whatever reason. It's just not something that's going to happen because of compliance or regulatory reasons. Can you do Hello for Business? Yes, you definitely can do Hello for Business, and it does work. So it's going to make your life easier for your end user, and it's going to be more secure, is probably the point that I'm going to stress on that. But we don't have any documentation. I don't have any documentation or experience of doing the on-prem solution because I've never needed to do it. And it's not something that I would be comfortable talking about. So then this comes back to that trust model. We have key trust versus certificate trust. Key trust, easy, mostly. Make sure your certificates are set up right, your CRL's right, and you can authenticate in with a domain controller of 2016, at least 2016 schema, but ideally a 2016 domain controller. Certificate trust. This is where a certificate is required being tied to the device. Must have an authentication certificate issued to the end user. You can use it on a 2008 R2 or higher domain controller, and you need to have device write back in place. Sounds easy, right? And it sounds really tempting to go down that path because I'm sure if we Not to call out any companies, but I'm sure at least 3 or 4 companies on the call here are still running their domain controllers at 2008. And it's a safe place. If you feel like putting your hand up, I'm not going to judge. Silently, I will. But it's one of these technologies that start looking at upgrading your domain controllers. Don't use the fact that you're running 2008 as a reason why you have to stay at that level. You can have mixed mode domains where you have some at 2008 R2 and some at 2016. I know a large bank in Australia that's doing it that way. So this is where we're going to have a bit of fun. Let's talk about demos. So I'm just going to quickly minimize this, and we're going to go across into my lab. So what I have here, just for people to understand what we're talking about when we're talking about Hello for Business and pins, is this is a simple Windows 10 workstation. We have the ability to use a pin here. One of the things that I'm going to highlight when doing testing is make sure you don't have enhanced session mode turned on in Hyper-V. So when you're using enhanced session mode in Hyper-V, it's going off and remote desktoping into the device. That allows you to copy files in and associated tasks. Great, right? But it doesn't allow the use of Hello for Business technologies. If we step and turn off enhanced session, it gives us the ability to use our PIN. Doesn't give us biometrics because, well, we don't have biometrics attached to the VM. If I go sign in options, I can actually revert to my password if I need to. So why would I use PIN over password in this scenario? Well, password's going to work across the board, right? My password works the same into my file service. Christ, if Hello for Business and certificates fail for some reason, users can silently sign in with their password without any problems. But the PIN gives me a better user experience. So we'll step through that, and I'm going to quickly put in my super awesome PIN. That is numerical because I can't be bothered having a complex PIN. It's a rule that you create. But we're just typing in our PIN and it goes and authenticates and provides that whole auth through. The other thing that I'll note when using Hyper-V for your lab is make sure you use the TPM option. So by default, that's not enabled on any VM when it's created. But if you don't have that checked and you're saying you need a physical TPM on the device, it won't let you auto sign into, it won't let you use Hello for Business to set up, and it'll come up with a failure. So it's important to remember this when labbing it out. Right, so we have a VM, we're signed in. If I go here, and I'm going to go to my command line, and it's Hello for Business is the part that I'm going to call out here. That's not Hello for Business, it's AAD joined. So if I go ds reg cmd/status, we'll see that I'm connected via Hello for Business if Teams doesn't pop up over the top of it. So in here, we can see all of the information about my device. But there's a couple of things that we want to call out in here. Let's see if we can find it. It is this bit here, NGC set and NGC key ID. So other than Ben and Adam, because guys have gone through this before, does anybody want to have a guess what NGC stands for as an acronym? I'll take that as a nobody knows. So NGC stands for Next Gen Credential. This is the Hello for Business Authentication token. This is what's being registered into Azure Active Directory and or on-prem if you're just using the on-prem services. So you can go and see if the user's signing in with NGC and how it all works. We also see that the device is registered into Azure Active Directory, but not domain joined and not enterprise joined. So this is a full cloud only device. Super important we call that out because by default, you won't have access to on-prem file servers without putting in your username and password. We then step across and we're going to go to our domain controller because we'll actually know. Let's start at our certificate authority because we talked about certificate revocation lists and the awesomeness that is. And if I can remember which password I'm using. So there's a couple of gotchas around setting up certificate authorities. And it's really important that you understand this because you're going to have to explain it to whoever's managing your certificate authority because they won't understand it either. I didn't say that out loud, but that's what everybody's thinking. When we go to our CA and we go to properties, we need to go to our extensions and we have two options here being CDP, so our certificate or certificate revocation list distribution point, and our authority information access. Both of these are important that they are accessible via the website, being a HTTP path. So what you'll note in my environment, this is a lab. I'm going to call that out. It's a lab. It's using the defaults because it's easy for me to move that forward. But you may want to go in here and go, well, I want to add my HTTP path as http://pki.carlab1.com/ all of this. So all of these variables you can go and insert into the certificate location path when you're creating it. So once I paste that in there, I then need to go and create an Azure Active Directory app proxy that routes to this on-prem server. That allows me to access it externally, but the reason why I need to publish it here first is because it then gets included on the certificates that are issued to the devices. So we're going to click through, we're going to hit cancel on that because we're not going to want to change our certificate authority because it will cause some issues. But what is a CRL is probably a bigger question that a lot of people are asking. If we go into C, Windows, cert nodes, let's see if we can remember the path. If we go to properties, extensions, and we can see our file here, system32 cert server, cert enroll. System32 cert server, cert enroll, and this is the default location where you're going to see your certificate revocation list. If we go and turn on our view and show extensions, you'll see that it's a CRL and a plus CRL. So the plus.CRL is the delta changes of that certificate revocation list, whereas the CRL is the primary certificate revocation list. If we double click on that, we can see all of the information about our certificate revocation list, issue and distribution point where it got issued from, as well as anything associated to that. It will also show you the next time it's going to be published. So in my lab, I'm publishing every 7 days. And that's super, super important because if you have an offline root certificate authority and you only issue your certificate, where is it? If you only issue your certificate revocation list every 7 days, where is it? If you set it so it only issues and updates that revocation list once a week, you need to make sure there's a mechanism in place that's copying that CRL from your offline root CA to wherever you're hosting your certificate revocation list from. Very, very important, because if you don't do that, you will stop authentication. So it will also cause some other issues down the path, but nowhere near as much as it does for authentication. And that's the same with the publish delta. So what I'd be saying is, if you're going to do it, make sure you have an easy way to manage it. Right now, I don't have any certificates revoked, but if I did, it would appear in that list. So that's super important. Where does that sit in the certificate? Well, let's go over to my domain controller. And I'll quickly sign in here, because what we've issued to the domain controller is a special certificate. So by default, there is a domain controller certificate authority, domain controller authentication object, which we clone and we turn on KDC authentication as a extension here for the application policy. We then supersede the existing domain controller authentication, and Kerberos authentication certificate. That gives us the ability to sign into the device. The KDC is the key distribution center, and that is super important for Kerberos authentication, and it's used to do that authentication. And if we go here and we go to certlm.msc, and it's going to pop up our certificates that have been issued for the server. And we will see all the way down the bottom here is our certificate that we've issued, which is KDC authentication. We double click on that, we go to details and we scroll down. And if we go to the CRL distribution point, we'll see all the different locations we can go to get that certificate validated. And here's the important one, which is the URL equals. So that is the minimum requirement when doing Windows Hello for Business, is to have that in all of your certificates. If you don't, you're going to need to reissue. The other thing that I'll call out is make sure your SHA is above SHA-1. SHA-1 can be cracked, so can SHA-2. That's why we're using SHA-256. The key length is super important as well. Don't go above 2048 because it's going to cause issues for your environment. Cool. So we've got the certificates down pat. The next part that we're going to talk about is AAD Connect. So if you've had Azure Active Directory Connect in your environment for an extended period of time, make sure when you're setting it up for the first time, go in here and go and hit refresh directory schema. Don't do it through this one here, which I did at a customer site, because it works, but it causes problems where you have to have a username and password. So this is why we always use it over here and go refresh directory schema. That will go through and it will update the schema in AAD Connect that's coming down from Azure Active Directory as well as from Active Directory to have the correct objects that are required. So we've stepped through that, and what's actually happening under the hood is, I'm just going to quickly bring up my browser object, and we're going to go to ak.ms/ge preview. So how many people use Graph and know what Graph is? Wow, nobody knows. Awesome, of course you do. I know Ben does.
I don't know what's Graph.
So Graph is the object database that sits under Azure Active Directory and Intune. Super important that we know this because it contains a whole heap of really important data. And part of what we're looking at here down the bottom is somewhere in here. We can see all our licenses assigned to the user object, but we also have, if I can find the object, assigned licenses, assigned plans. Somewhere on here, there is the authentication token, which has the next-gen credential. So it's going to have what device from Azure Active Directory it's associated to, as well as the hash of what that token looks like. I know why, because I'm hitting the wrong user. User slash.
It's also worth pointing out while Steve's doing this is you can only access this data through Graph. It's not currently exposed in the UI. And
I don't think it will change like that because of security.
Yeah.
So here it is here. Let's go up. So here's our next-gen credential. So we have device keys, and we have a key type of next-gen credential. It then shows us a key material, which is the nonce that gets returned back to the device to say this is your public key to get access to your private key. From there, we have the device ID, which will relate to the VM that I've created that I'm accessing it from. So this all gets copied down using Azure Active Directory Connect, and it will appear in LDAP. In your Active Directory. And the easiest way to look at it, and I'll show you why first, is if we go to Azure Active Directory, we go and select our users, and I'm really bad using the user container, not an OU, because GPO is not going to apply. If we go down to extensions and go to our attribute editor, we're going to look for MSDS key credential link, which is this one here. If we look at that, we can see part of the information. And if we then try and double click on it, we'll say we're not able to look at that binary object because there's no way to view that in the GUI. The way we look at it is we go to the LDP application and we connect to the tree, which when you select the down arrow, you'll see a whole heap of additional namespaces inside your Active Directory. That's by default. It allows you to go and look at some other stuff like configuration will give you all of your certificate authority information. But we're looking at our default, which is CarLab 1. We click OK on that. We then drill down to our container and we can see that it's a container because it's using CN, not OU. Once we go to our container, we go to Stephen Hosking, and in here we have our key credential link. And it shows the same object that we've got referenced across. So it's synced into it's synced from Azure Active Directory to Active Directory via AAD Connect. When we go and look at our AAD Connect rules editor, we can then see that in here under user NGC key, and it's going to do the rule to translate that. If you don't see that field, you definitely need to go and do the schema update for AAD Connect. So look, there's a whole heap of stuff that we can keep going into. I'm happy to keep talking, but is there anything you'd be interested in learning beyond this around Hello for Business, lessons learned, things like that? Or has everybody fallen to sleep and very excited talking about Patch My PC?
I guess, I mean, I've got a million questions about this because, you know, I'm currently having issues with it, the implementation. I guess my main thing is around the CRL distribution stuff. You've obviously said that it needs to be publicly accessible, which is fine, and that it needs to be when you've got a scenario like I do where we've got multiple DCs, what needs to be done around that?
So where you have multiple DCs, you need to make sure that the KDC certificate, which is this certificate here that we've issued, is on all of your domain controllers, because always remember when you're going to authenticate, the device being the server in this scenario is going to randomly select the domain controller from its group. Technically, it's supposed to use the subnet, but it can go beyond that depending on how your domain controllers are set up. So always make sure that that certificate is consistent across your environment, that it's issued from the correct certificate authority, and you only have one there, because it will pick up the first one. It's not going to say, well, you've got 5 certificate authorities in your environment. We're going to allow that same KDC authentication certificate for every single environment. No, it's one certificate per domain controller.
Yep. Okay. All right.
And then from the the CRL point of view, that comes down to routes. So if you've got routing issues between sites, between domain controllers and everything associated, it's easier if you've got that sitting in Azure Active Directory app proxies to present that through and connect it through.
Yeah, that's interesting. We'll talk about this offline, but I'm pretty sure that's how it's set up. But yeah, I don't know. There seems to be some fun routing problems.
Yep.
See if you want to point out those event viewers, where to trace the issues when you have with Hello for Business.
Yes. So thanks,
yeah.
Bruce. So a couple of the things you need to start looking at, and this is where certs become really important. We're going to be looking at the CAPI2 auth. So CAPI2 is all around certificates and how they're authenticating between the environments. So we're in the event viewer. I'm just going to zoom this in a little bit because I'm guessing it's going to be small. And my machine's a bit slow right now. So then if we go into app services, we go to Microsoft, we go to Windows, and the CAPI2 is where all our certificate auth is going to be. By default, I don't have access to it because I haven't run it as admin. Let me just do this. I think I've got an admin with this account. Let's find out. No, I do not. And we go to event viewer, we go to applications. I'll just take that out of full screen. And we go to Microsoft, Windows. And so I'm going to show you a different log here quickly. So if you're doing Intune, the log that you need to look at is Device Management Enterprise Diagnostic Provider. The easiest way to find it is literally bring it into Windows and look for the longest log file, because that's always going to be the case. We have a very, very, very long name on that one. So now when we go to CAPI2 and we go to operational, we have no information there, even though I've been doing authentication, and you'll see that it's disabled. So by default, CAPI2 is disabled, and you need to enable that log to capture the information when you're doing diagnostics and troubleshooting. If you don't do that, you're not going to be able to see if you've got issues with your CRL and everything associated around it. This is both on the server side and the client side. You need to be looking at CAPI2 because the authentication happens in both scenarios. We then also need to talk about the Kerberos authentication, which is down here under security Kerberos, because we're using Kerberos underneath the scenario. And we go enable log, and you'll see that information there. And it'll pop up in there every time you do the authentication. That's going to exist the same on your domain controller and on your file server or whatever object is doing the authentication. So I've talked about file server as being the target, but it can also be websites and applications. It all just comes down to how your systems are set up. Does that answer your question, Bruce?
I think so. Steve, is this the elusive KDC logs that you have been talking to me about?
So there are KDC logs on the domain controller. I'll be completely honest, I can't remember the path for them. But yes, there are logs on the domain controller around your KDC. So your key distribution center log, it's all command line and you can pull it through. I knew Ben was going to ask the question, but I forgot to go and research it before he asked it.
It's fine. You know what they say about preparation.
Yes. So any other questions? Have I inspired you to go and deploy it?
I have a question, but I feel stupid if I ask it because I haven't been paying much attention.
That's okay. Ask the question, man. That's what we're here for.
So in an Azure AD scenario, when you have Hello for Business, and you mainly are running co-managed, I mean, can that act as a shim basically between, going into co-management, like between, you know what I mean? Because we're having this discussion about setting up a key trust or go between a key trust or certificate based. And we're trying to find out the pluses and minuses between the
Key
two.
trust.
And key trust all the way?
Key trust all the way. So the answer to your question is yes. What you're looking at is Hello for Business syncing between on-prem and the cloud.
Right.
So this is exactly the scenario we're talking about. And the key trust scenario is easier to set up, easier to maintain. Certificate trust requires a lot more maintenance and is not something that is prevalently seen in the environment or in the wild. Typically, you're going to see hybrid key trust more. When we talk Hello for Business for MMD, we talk hybrid key trust. Just to give you context. It's a little bit of work up front to make sure your domain control, at least one domain controller is running 2016, but it also forces the hand of these applications that are sitting there and saying, oh, we can't go to 2016 for a domain because blah.
What are some of the limitations where what usually doesn't work using Hello for Business key trust over being directly like domain joined? I mean,
so you can do key trust with AAD joined devices, right? It's fully supported because you're issuing a certificate via Intune to the user object, and it will have the certificate. So long as you've selected the correct certificate, it will issue it out and we'll use it. And it's just a lot more maintenance because
does that
you've got to
overcome the issue with not having a VPN, like an always-on VPN running as connecting as a device with autopilot? I'm just trying to think of a way not having to do always-on VPN, and would this help me with that?
Well, if you're when you're talking autopilot with the always-on VPN, I'm assuming you're looking at hybrid domain joined devices.
Yes.
Correct?
Yes.
Can I ask, do you have an application that requires device level authentication?
We have over 400 applications.
That's okay. That wasn't the question I asked.
Well, I have no way of knowing right now. That's the thing.
One of the things that when I was a consultant and even when I talk AAD joined only as the primary methodology, let's try it until it doesn't work.
Yeah.
Because there's no time lost in the effort to test everything or go through the dev cycles as AAD joined until you can't. And the advantage of going AAD over AAD or hybrid AAD joined during autopilot is immense because the supportability it's more complicated, we'll say in the politically correct way.
Yeah.
If as soon as we turn around and say we need to do hybrid AAD joined as our autopilot provisioning process, we're sitting there and having to have a connector. We have to have either the device with line of sight to the domain controller on the local network or via VPN. So there's a whole heap more breakpoints in that out-of-box experience. Whereas if we're going straight to AAD joined, it's going to make your life a lot easier. So technically, yes, what you're asking, Hello for Business won't help you because the always-on VPN isn't connected at that point and won't have downloaded the user certificate.
Yeah.
You'd have to have device-level authentication for your VPN at that point.
Yeah.
I believe.
I was thinking of maybe not that scenario, but like going with Azure AD and then eventually be able to tie into like a hybrid join type. Well, I know there's limitations when you use key trust that you have to use a PIN or you can't see domain resources, and then that becomes a support issue for us, right?
No, that's incorrect.
That's incorrect.
You can still use your password to access the on-prem resources with key trust, and you can use the PIN as well. So long as you've got that hybrid key trust right back, which is the methodology I just spoke through of syncing the next gen credential object back into your MS key credential link in Active Directory. And there's all the certificate trust. And the important thing is all you need on the client computer from a certificate point of view in hybrid key trust is just the root and or intermediary certificates all the way through. You don't need to have a certificate issued to the user object or the device object to use hybrid key trust in that scenario. So you can get away with having a single CA just for identity. That's all it's issuing is the root and the intermediary certificates and the KDC certificates to your domain controllers, and that's it. You don't need anything beyond that.
Awesome.
And it becomes a lot easier to manage and maintain. The other side of it is it just makes life easier going down and not having to worry about ADFS, because ADFS is a great product, but maintaining it and linking that into that certificate key trust as well as AAD Connect, AAD Connect as well as hybrid AD authentication for Autopilot, as well as your authentication into your VPN, as well as anything else that's sitting there. You start seeing all of these breakpoints in the workflow.
Yeah.
The other part that Ben's just flagging there is AADDS. It's great, really good product, but it's not going to allow you to do hybrid key trust scenarios for your on-prem resources, because it's not doing Kerberos tokens at a very high level.
Specifically, it's not a two-way trust. So your AAD does not understand that AADDS exists. So it's basically a read-only thing. So and also it has no physical way of adding those extra extension attributes. So it's just not possible. Admin. Exactly. So I've got a client at the moment. You know what? I've probably got a couple of clients at the moment who have this issue, but one specifically who they went down the route of doing full cloud, everything cloud, and I applauded them for it. But they also want to maintain their on-prem file server.
Well, it's actually an on-prem print server that got added after the fact that.
No, this is different. But also awesome. That one, I realize I now have two. But yeah, so they basically want to leverage the ability to use Kerberos, but they've gone full cloud, and they're just like, oh, that's fine. We'll set up KDC and hybrid key trust, and it's just not possible. With AADDS, you cannot do what Steve's just demoed. I've learnt the hard way.
It's fun.
It is. So yeah, I mean, basically the takeaway here is that if you have any on-prem resources that you can only authenticate to via Kerberos, which you may with print servers and file servers and the like, it essentially means that no matter what you do, you will need to maintain some kind of on-prem AD infrastructure.
That's pretty much the answers I was looking for. Thank you.
Yep.
Not a problem at all. Any other questions? Well, I think we've hit the number there, Greg.
I think we have. Really appreciate it, Steve. Really good to have those conversations, and just appreciate your time.
Not a problem.
Saturday morning, especially.
Yeah. So I've just put up on the screen references that you can look up. So this one here is a link back to Scott Duffy, who's a program manager at Microsoft. He did a blog, in 2017, talking about setting up Hello for Business. It's still one of the simplest processes that I've seen go through setting it up. It does reference older versions of Intune, but at a high level, it gives you the client-side configurations and everything associated to that. And then we've got the Microsoft Docs page for it, where we're talking about setting up Hello and hybrid key trust. And it's got quite a lot of verbose information. It's a lot better than what it was even 12 months ago, even 6 months ago. So highly recommend having a look. And then the last one is a shameless plug for the Intune training series. where we've done a couple of sessions on Hello for Business, being the first one where we actually went through the process of setting it up, and it took us 2 hours. And well, we have 2 hours of video for about 10 hours of recording, Adam. And then the second one where we're just talking about somebody or Adam going through the process of actually getting it implemented in his environment. And I remember talking to his team 12 months ago saying, you need to look at Hello for Business. Now, like, we can't because we've got NTLM, we've got this, we've got that. So the fact that they've made that change in 12 months is just awesome. So it is technically possible. It's something I highly recommend.
It's pretty cool.
Cool.
Hi, Adam.
Hi, Adam. And obviously make sure you hit the link in the chat for the swag stuff. So feel free to take this share now, Greg.